The trattoria in Ballard had always been one of my favorite places. Brick walls lined with old photographs, garlic and basil hanging in the air, and the warm clatter of plates made me feel at home the moment I stepped inside. Tonight, it was alive with families and laughter. And for once, I wanted to believe the warmth at my own table matched the glow around us. Gavin had picked this place for my 62nd birthday, claiming he remembered how much I loved the chicken parmesan here. His wife, Taran, sat across from me. Her smile practiced polite, never quite reaching her eyes. The waiter poured a deep red wine from Walla Walla, filling our glasses as Gavin lifted his in my direction. "To Mom," he said, his voice full of affection. "For being stronger than anyone I know." I felt my throat tighten as I raised my glass. For a moment, the shadows of old hurts lifted, and I let myself feel like the luckiest woman in the room. That was when I felt the slightest brush at my elbow. A young server ponytail pulled tight, leaned as if to clear crumbs. Her lips barely moved. "Don't drink that," she whispered, sliding a folded slip of paper beside my plate before walking away with practiced ease. I froze. My fingers, suddenly heavy, unfolded the note under the edge of the bread basket. "Do not drink. Your life is in danger." The hum of conversation around me dulled to a blur. My heart thudded against my ribs, but I kept my face neutral across the table. Taryn lifted her glass, her hand trembling just slightly. Gavin turned, flagging another server for more bread. In that instant, I made a choice. With a calmness that surprised even me, I shifted my glass toward Taryn's place setting, sliding hers in front of me. The wine looked identical, dark and smooth under the golden lights. I forced a smile, raised the glass now in front of me, and said to family and to another year together. Our glasses touched with a chime, the note burning in my pocket, and I waited for what would follow. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Gavin launched into a story about a new client at his office, and I nodded along, pretending to sip from the glass that wasn't mine. Taryn smiled, though her eyes darted toward me every so often. I held my breath without realizing it, waiting for some sign that the note was a cruel prank. Then, 5 minutes later, it began. Taryn's hand went to her stomach. Her fork clattered against the plate, and she whispered something I couldn't catch. Her face drained of color beads of sweat forming along her hairline. Gavin leaned in immediately. "Taryn, what's wrong?" She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. The restaurant erupted in shouts and scraping chairs as other diners noticed. Gavin caught her before she hit the floor. His face twisted with panic. "Somebody call 911!" he shouted, his voice breaking. I sat frozen for a heartbeat, my own pulse roaring in my ears. Then I felt the paper in my pocket and clutched it tight, as though it alone tethered me to the moment. I forced myself to move. "Don't clear these glasses," I told the wide-eyed busboy reaching for our table. My tone surprised even me, firm, commanding. "Leave them exactly as they are." Within minutes, paramedics rushed through the doorway, weaving past startled guests. They crouched beside Taryn, attaching monitors, asking Gavin questions he couldn't answer through his fear. I stayed seated, hands folded, heart trembling inside my chest, but my face a masked blood pressure. Dropping, one paramedic called. They lifted her onto a stretcher, securing straps, as Gavin followed, still clutching her hand. I rose quietly, steadying myself with the back of my chair. As they wheeled her out, I fell and stepped behind the slip of paper digging into my palm. The ride in the ambulance blurred around me, siren wailing, Gavin pleading with Taryn to stay awake, the paramedics working with practiced urgency. I sat rigid in the corner seat, eyes on the IV line, mind on the wine I hadn't drunk. Downtown lights flickered against the windows as we pulled into the emergency bay. The doors flew open, and I followed them inside, bracing myself for the answers waiting beyond. The emergency department swallowed us in its harsh white light, a jarring contrast to the warm glow of the restaurant. Nurses moved quickly, calling out vitals, attaching lines, pushing Taryn through swinging doors before Gavin or I could catch our breath. I sat beside him in the waiting area. The note crumpled in my pocket, a secret that pressed harder with every minute that passed. Time dragged. Gavin rubbed his hands over his face, muttering to himself that it must have been food poisoning. Maybe something from the salad she ordered. His certainty was desperate, as if clinging to it could make it true. At last, a physician approached. Clipboard in hand, he introduced himself as Dr. E. Lee and motioned for us to follow him into a small consultation room. His expression was measured. "But serious. Your wife is stable for the moment," he said to Gavin. "But her blood work shows extremely high levels of dian." Gavin blinked. "I don't understand. What's that?" "It's a heart medication," Dr. Lee explained. "Safe in small, prescribed doses, but in the concentration we found it's toxic combined with alcohol. It can be lethal." The words rang in my ears. Dioxin. I'd heard of it years ago when a neighbor's husband was treated for arrhythmia. My fingers tightened around the note. Gavin shook his head, almost laughing. "There's no way. Taryn doesn't take anything like that. This has to be a mistake." "It's not," I said quietly. I pulled the folded slip of paper from my pocket and laid it on the table. Dr. Lee leaned forward, brow furrowing, as he read. Gavin's eyes darted from me to the note, disbelief spreading across his face. "Where did you get this?" "A server at the restaurant slipped it to me," I replied. "That's why I switched glasses with her." Gavin's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked like a boy caught between two realities. His wife, the woman he thought he knew, and the evidence now staining our evening with poison. Dr. Lee's tone was steady. "We'll need to involve hospital security and notify the police. If you have the glasses from the restaurant, they must be preserved." I nodded. I told them not to clear the table. Gavin stared down, shaking his head. "This doesn't make sense. She was worried about you always saying you seemed forgetful, that we should look at care options. She wouldn't." But I remembered every carefully planted word, every gentle suggestion of nursing homes and powers of attorney, and felt the ground tilt beneath me as I prepared for what would come next. Detective Asha Patel arrived the next morning, her presence calm but direct. The kind of steady energy that made it clear she had seen families unravel before. She asked to speak with me alone in a small office just off the waiting area. Gavin protested, but she reminded him gently that the investigation required clear accounts without interruption. She began with simple questions: how I felt, what I remembered of the evening. Then her gaze sharpened. "Mrs. Hartman, has anything unusual happened in recent months? Anything that might suggest someone was trying to compromise your health?" Her question unlatched a door I hadn't wanted to open. I told her about the teas Taryn often insisted I try, soothing blends she said were good for memory or digestion. After drinking them, I would feel unsteady, sometimes so exhausted I had to lie down. There were soups too, always delivered with a bright smile, always followed by hours where my mind felt wrapped in fog. Detective Patel wrote quickly, her pen scratching the paper. "Did anyone else notice these changes?" I hesitated, then nodded. Taryn kept little notes. She called them forgetfulness logs. She'd point out if I repeated myself or misplaced things, then jot it down as if keeping a record. The detective's brows lifted. "Did she ever ask you to sign anything?" "Yes," I whispered. Papers, she said, were precautionary financial documents. Just in case something happened to me, she told me Gavin should be prepared, that it was responsible. I remembered the heavy pen in my hand, the haze behind my eyes, the trust I'd forced myself to extend. Patel set down her pen. We'll order your labs today, Mrs. Hartman. If this wasn't a one-time incident, traces of long-term exposure may still be present. That will tell us whether someone has been administering small doses over time. Her words studied me and frightened me all at once. I thought of the meals, the teas, the gentle corrections when I forgot some trivial detail. I had told myself it was age. Now, I wasn't sure what had belonged to me and what had been written by someone else's hand. The detective rose, assuring me the results would guide the next step, and I knew the truth was only beginning to surface. Detective Patel returned that afternoon, this time with the young server who had slipped me the note. She introduced herself as Yesenia Cruz, a nursing student who worked part-time at the trattoria. She sat across from me, hands twisting in her lap, her eyes carrying the weight of something far heavier than her years. "I'm sorry if I frightened you last night," she began softly, but I couldn't stay quiet when I saw her. I asked, though I already knew the answer. Yenya nodded. "Your daughter-in-law." I recognized her the moment she walked in. 2 years ago, she went by another name, Taryn Peters. She was working as a medical assistant when my grandmother first met her. The room seemed to tilt. Patel leaned forward. "Tell us what happened." "Yes, my abuela was strong," she said, voice trembling but clear. "She cooked. She paid her own bills. She remembered everything. Then this woman came around. At first, she was kind, brought food, offered to help with errands. But after a few months, Abua started forgetting small things. Taryn kept telling us it was normal, that maybe it was dementia. She even wrote logs about it, the same way you just described." I felt my stomach knot. "Yeshia." Patel pressed gently. "How did your grandmother pass heart failure?" They said, but she never had heart problems. Her voice cracked. "I always believed something wasn't right, but I couldn't prove it. When I saw her last night, the way she hovered over your glass, I knew she was trying again." The silence that followed was heavy. Gavin had stepped out during the meeting, and I was glad. Hearing this from a stranger was almost too much for me. I couldn't imagine what it would do to him. I drew a deep breath and looked at Patel. If she forged logs about me, if she pushed me to sign things, then there may already be documents in place. Patel gave a short nod. "We'll need your attorney involved as soon as possible." I pulled out my phone, fingers trembling, and dialed the number. My attorney answered on the second ring, and I told him we had an emergency. As I ended the call, Yenia's gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. She had seen the pattern clearly, and I could no longer afford to doubt it. My attorney spread the documents across his desk, his jaw tightening as he explained what I was looking at. There in black ink was my own signature beneath a power of attorney addendum and a competency trigger clause. According to these papers, the moment I was deemed unable to handle my affairs, Gavin, under Taryn's direction, would have immediate control over my finances and property. I remembered the day vaguely, the heavy pen in my hand, the haze of fatigue pressing behind my eyes. Tan had been there encouraging me with her soft voice, telling me it was only precaution, nothing binding, unless necessary. Now I saw it for what it was. A trap laid carefully over months. My attorney's voice was clipped. "We'll move to void these immediately. I'll file with the court today. Notify your banks and ensure nothing can be executed against you for the moment. Everything is frozen." He slid the papers back into a folder, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The door creaked open then, and Gavin stepped inside, his face pale. He looked at the folder, then at me. "Mom, I didn't know it had gone this far." His voice broke. "She told me it was to protect you, to make things easier later. She even asked me to convince you to retitle the house so it would avoid probate." He stopped, shaking his head. I didn't see it. The weight of his words pressed down on me. I could hear the shame in his voice, the way he wrestled with his complicity. For a moment, anger flared in me, but it burned itself out quickly, leaving only exhaustion. "We'll untangle it," my attorney said firmly. "The law is on your side." I nodded, clutching my hands in my lap. But a thought lingered like a shadow. Precautionary papers already in place are only protection for those who want power before it's owed. And now the evidence was clear. Someone had been preparing to sign my life away. When Detective Patel told me Taryn was awake, I knew I couldn't avoid it. Gavin insisted on coming, though fear sat heavy in his eyes. The three of us entered the hospital room together. A uniformed officer waited by the door while Patel placed her phone on the bedside table. Recording with calm formality, Taryn lay propped up on pillows, pale but alert. The moment she saw Gavin, she reached out, her voice trembling. "You don't believe them, do you? I was poisoned too. We're both victims." Gavin didn't move. I stepped closer instead. "The wine glass you drank from was mine. A server warned me. You weren't supposed to be the one in that bed." Her expression faltered for only a second before she forced a brittle laugh. "That's absurd. Why would I ever hurt you?" Patel's tone was even because we have your search history on multiple devices. Queries about dosing interactions with alcohol, how to mimic dementia symptoms. We also have pharmacy links connecting you to a technician who diverted medications, and footage from the restaurant shows your hand near Mrs. Hartman's glass. Taryn's jaw tightened. She looked at Gavin, not at me. "I was doing it for us. For you. Don't you see your mother is aging? She forgets things. She slows down. It was better to manage it. A peaceful transition instead of chaos." "Manage it," I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. "Yes," she said, voice sharper now. "Better to move on than drag the living down. Why should we all suffer watching her decline? This way she would have been comfortable, and we could build a future without the burden." Gavin's face crumpled. "You call my mother a burden?" His voice cracked. "She raised me. She's the reason I have any future at all." The mask slid fully from Taryn's face then. No pretense of affection left. "You're naive. All of you. Families spend fortunes keeping the old alive when they should be letting go. I was practical. That's all." I stared at her, not recognizing the woman who had smiled across from me at countless dinners. Patel stood signaling to the officer. "Taryn Keats, you are under arrest for attempted murder with additional charges pending," as they read her rights. Gavin pressed his hand to his forehead, tears spilling down his cheeks. I reached for him, steadying him with the only thing I had left, my presence, when they wheeled her away in restraints. The silence she left behind was heavier than her words, but it was also the first silence that felt like truth. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and paper, a place where truth and lies were weighed with the same solemn tone. I sat at the witness stand, hands folded tightly, while the prosecutor guided the toxicologist through the results. Charts and numbers confirmed what my body already knew. Small doses of dioxin had been building inside me for months, enough to mimic confusion and weakness, enough to set the stage for what Taryn had planned. Yenia followed me to the stand. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she described her grandmother's decline under Taryn's earlier identity. She told the jury about the meals, the logs, the sudden heart failure that never made sense. When she recounted the night of my birthday, how she watched Taryn's hand hover near my glass. Her eyes never left the jurors. Courage, clear and undeniable, poured from her with every word. Then came Gavin. He stood taller than I'd expected. Though grief pulled at his features, I let myself be convinced. He told the court, "I thought my mother was slipping because Taryn told me so." Again and again, I believed her instead of the woman who raised me. I'm ashamed of that. But I know now I was manipulated, and I want the truth on record. Hearing those words broke something in me, but it also mended for the first time. He chose to believe me in front of everyone, not just behind closed doors. When the jury returned, the four-person's voice carried across the silent room. Guilty on all counts, including attempted murder. I exhaled not in triumph, but in weary relief. Justice had been spoken. Though the scars it traced inside me would remain long after the gavel struck after the trial, I couldn't bring myself to return to the house in Queen Anne. Every corner reminded me of the months I spent doubting myself, of Taryn's careful intrusions disguised as kindness. I sold it quietly and bought a small bungalow in West Seattle, where the Puget Sound stretched wide and constant outside my windows. The salt air felt like a cleansing I didn't know I needed. My first act in that new home was to sit with my attorney and rewrite everything: medical directives, financial instructions, a fiduciary cosigner who would ensure no one person ever held control again. This time, every line was chosen by me, signed in full awareness, a safeguard not of fear, but of ownership. Yes, I visited often. Together, we began hosting monthly talks at the community center, teaching older adults and their families how to recognize manipulation cloaked in care. She spoke of her grandmother. I spoke of myself. And the room always filled with quiet nods and eyes that recognized the patterns. We were not experts by degree, but by survival. Gavin came once, sitting in the back, listening more than speaking. I caught his eye at the end, and in that glance was the beginning of a new kind of trust between us, one built on truth rather than illusion. The weight of silence no longer crushed me. It carried me forward, asking who would choose to listen and who would slip quietly away. A year later, my bungalow by the water felt like a place I had always belonged. The garden was thriving lavender brushing the windows, tomatoes heavy on the vine, a reminder that life grows when tended with care. That evening, I set the table with simple plates and fresh flowers. Nothing extravagant, just enough to honor the company I chose to keep. Gavin arrived first, carrying a bottle of cider. His steps were careful but lighter than before, as though the weight he once carried had finally eased. Not far behind came Yenia, her textbooks tucked under one arm, laughing about how finals had nearly consumed her. Two neighbors I'd come to trust joined as well, filling the house with the kind of warmth that comes only from people who show up without expectation. We ate slowly, passing dishes back and forth, conversation weaving between us like music. At one point, Gavin lifted his glass, not with the grand toasts of old, but a quiet acknowledgement to choosing better. He said it was enough. Later, when the last plates were stacked and the candles burned low, I noticed the sealed envelope still sitting on the bookshelf. The letter Tan had sent from prison untouched, its words, powerless without my consent to read them. For months it had tempted me, but now it was only paper. Her influence ended where my refusal began. I turned back to the laughter around my table, feeling the hum of my own pulse steady and clear. They had tried to write my ending. I revised the genre,